My relationship with my mother is always tough. It starts all the way from my childhood. My mother used to be an alcoholic when I was in primary school. Many times I saw her drunk her ass out in public as we were having dinners with other families, which made me extremely shameful and embarrassed. She used to suppress all of my motivation and curiosity by her verbal and emotional abuse. School is everything. I was raised like an animal that only knew to obey every order from her without any questions. The only positive feedback I got from her was when I got a good grade, and beside that was the endless morbid control, emotional blackmail, and gaslighting. I was told by her that all of the evil things she did to me were for my good, and I was responsible for all of her failures in her life. But I was too weak and immature to realize this toxic environment. But this experience drastically impacted how I formed my initial cognition about society and other people. I tend to deny myself and hold back my emotions. I became very introverted and anxious about other people's feelings, and I was always waiting for other people's validation first before I took certain actions, even going to the washroom. Just like how I was raised and how I was treated, I was constantly in the state of internal friction which wears out my soul every single day. Few years later, I moved to Canada in grade 8 as an immature kid who doesn't speak any English. Same for my mother. She was anxious, ignorant, and morbid. The unfamiliar environment further increased her insecurity and her desire to control me. She would control my daily routine, and my room had to be kept open. I was not allowed to go out after 7 o'clock. I felt like my junior high school life in Canada was like being in prison. I went to school full of anxiety and inferiority, listened to courses that I don't understand, and endure the pressure of an unfamiliar environment. After returning home, I could only secretly play games to give myself a break, masturbate, and then repeat the cycle. Due to this extremely lacking of security and knowledge, I started to seek validation from the surface level, which means using lies to cover my insecurity and faking a character. I started to pretending to be Bruce Lee, Yip Man, pretending I can fight. I started to pretend to be a K-pop star by wearing broken jeans and Vans shoes. I was extremely addicted to video games and found my ability inside of a virtual world. But in my deep awareness, I was still a helpless kid that tried to seek other people's validation. The further I head to this wrong direction of salvation, the more pain I feel, and the more I realize how toxic this relationship with my mother was, until I went to high school, the time where my self-awareness raised up. People's spirit of self-awareness and explorations to find inner growth is a formidable force, and nothing can stop anyone to find their freedom. I started to fight back when I was in high school. I was a broken kid who had no money, no relationships, no social connections, but I only knew one thing: I must fight my way through to find a chance to grow my inner self. Before I was completely destroyed by the morbid control from my mother, I must go somewhere by myself instead of sitting in a car driven by another person. I must learn things by myself instead of being brought to a tutoring classes. I must create my own asset instead of following what my mother told me. And this was a nasty fight. It was a fight between a powerless slavery and a fake tyranny. My mother used every dirty trick she could to blackmail and humiliate me, making me feel guilty, in denial, and suicidal. She drained every last drop of empathy and family values out of me, but there is one quality that she can never take away: my desire for a complete personality and my fighting spirit at all costs to achieve self-growth. I realized that I was a person, a living human instead of an animal. I was allowed to have my own pursuit, own emotions, and own desires. I didn't have to be shameful for expressing myself and tell other people who I am, instead of who they expect me to be. This was one of my biggest growths in my teenage life. So I started to learn things from scratch. I still remember the first time I went to Safeway on my own and brought myself a latte full of sugar and calories, but it tasted so good. I started to gain back control of my life after the end of my high school life, where I went to university alone. I was still lacking discipline and self-control due to my immature personality. I found myself hard to communicate with people, lacking motivation and low self-esteem. I played video games for days to enjoy myself from all these years of suppression, but ignored my real chance of growth and improvement. I started to blindly seek for love from females to try to make up for the love that I missed from my mother, but it didn't go well. So during that period of time, I started to blame my parents for not raising me well. I started to blame them for all my failures and frustrations. But the more I put this responsibility on my parents, the worse my mindset was, and the more I lacked motivation to improve. But I simply couldn't let go of this hate towards my parents for abusing my spirit when I was the weakest and didn't have the power to fight back. I did not have the courage to face my past and face my relationship with this devil who was my mother. 4 years of university life passed like a bullet through the air, and I graduated. During my university life, I never stopped seeking for the answer to liberate myself from this pain and find out where I can find relief. I know this hate cannot be solved by just simply forgive, but I couldn't find a way. My impression towards my mother was stuck on 6 years ago. Morbid, toxic woman who tried everything to control my life, until I recently went back and visited where she lives. The moment when I went back to that old apartment, my heart was beating fast. All the anger and frustration came back. The emotion rised up so quick that made me urging to smash the entire room. But my mind changed as I opened that door again. The person standing in front of me was no longer a crazy and angry woman. She felt so small in front of me, like a kid who is lacking knowledge for the real world. I went to my old bedroom and felt like everything was so small, and so does my devastating high school life, my loneliness, the bullies I experienced. I realized that I kept exaggerating the impact from my parents and underestimated my potential for growth. My mother was a normal human with limited knowledge and ability, and that evil image of her had already died the moment I left her. And the rest of what I hated was a chain that I made by myself. I realized that all of the hate and low self-esteem were the post-effect from her morbid control in the past, but I had the choice to cut them all off anytime from now on. So I faced my deepest scar one last time, let all my memories buried in the past, packed all my tears and wounds, and carried them on my own backpack. I forgive myself, and I forgive my mother.